Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. Later this year, Azerbaijan will host the UN's COP29 climate summit. It's one of the top 10 most fossil fuel-dependent countries in the world. But that's all set to change as Azerbaijan looks to transition to a greener future. It's one of the many issues I discussed in an exclusive interview with Economy Minister Mikaiyil Jabbarov. But I began by asking him whether the real risk to global growth is not climate concerns, but a simple lack of trust.
Absolutely. I think global economy and global growth needs predictability. And in that sense, the growing security challenges, unilateral actions of individual member states of the trading system clearly does impact negatively economic growth. And in that sense, I think the importance of forum like this one is exactly in having a right platform for public and private sector to come across, share the views, and definitely more predictability, security and stability would never hurt for economic growth and development, but in fact would be reasons that will fuel it.
That's a big ask to have predictability because, of course, I know the markets hate uncertainty. As the world goes greener, how is Azerbaijan diversifying the economy away from fossil fuels?
We have been investing systemically, both institutionally and also in terms of economic policies and infrastructure in ensuring smooth energy transition. According to our national goals, by 2030, 30% of our energy demand will need to be covered from renewable sources. We're well ahead of that plan. We are open for cooperation with investors, and because Azerbaijan is a traditional energy producers, we have a good array both of international energy companies active and investing in renewable projects in Azerbaijan, but also national champions. So it is of no coincidence in that regard that our country has been entrusted decision by consensus to host COP29, a task that we take absolutely responsible and seriously, and we seek to contribute to this process. Talking of energy transition and renewable energy production, I think I also want to mention that while, as we speak, we continue to be a pan-European supplier in terms of the fossil fuels, both oil and natural gas, it is only natural that we are planning a project aimed at exporting green energy to European Union, and this is a regional project initiated by Azerbaijan jointly with Georgia, Bulgaria, Romania, now Hungary is joining, and across the Caspian, as we are also belonging to the Central Asian and Caspian region, we are in a very good and productive discussions with countries across the Caspian also to link them into that. This project envisages production of wind and solar energy in Azerbaijan and other countries, and transmission to European market via Black Sea seabed cable, which will be another contribution to global energy security and transition.
So lots of plans in terms of collaboration and partnerships. You've mentioned regions there in terms of Europe and nations with interest in the Caspian Sea. Where else would you like to forge partnerships? Where are some exciting projects in the pipeline?
We have strong existing and growing relationship with multiple partners. If you look at the trade balance of Azerbaijan, our major trading partners are European Union, China, Russian Federation, of course Turkey, Central Asian states, and GCC countries. And that does represent in a way also the structure of our mutual investments. Azerbaijan is also located on the crossroads of various transport routes. And clearly east-west, the route that connects, actually the shortest route that connects China to Europe, passes through Central Asian states, across Caspian and via Azerbaijan. Similarly, same is true with respect to north-south. And that our geography in a way also defines our economic partnership.
But you talk about forging closer ties within Europe. So what's going on with you in France at the moment?
Azerbaijan, as you know, has been a country which has been suffering from occupation of its territories in a blunt violation of international law. Territorial integrity of my country has been violated, and there has been times when one person out of 8 in a country has been either refugee or internally displaced person as a result of that occupation. Notwithstanding the 4 resolutions of UN Security Council, which demanded unconditional withdrawal of Armenian troops from territory of Azerbaijan, these have not been enforced, and notwithstanding all the efforts for over a quarter of the century by mediators, including France, and therefore Azerbaijan, acting in line with international order and exercising its right of self-defense, has restored territorial integrity. I also have to underline that our position for territorial integrity is consistent with international law and is applied to all disputes which arise in international law. Same is true with respect to our position to One China policy, as an example. And yes, Azerbaijan stands firmly on the basis of international law and against any attempts to fuel new confrontation in the region, because we believe that it's a time for peace and prosperity, and therefore unilateral actions aimed at fueling revanchism, and especially after having a chance to be a mediator, being unsuccessful mediator, not a single square meter of occupied lands was liberated as a result of the mediation. Being a Monday morning quarterback, we do not believe it's a constructive approach to the process.
Let's talk about trade. Let's talk about investments. What big investments have there been into Azerbaijan from China, and indeed the other way round?
China is important and growing trading partner of Azerbaijan. Our trade volume last year exceeded $3 billion, and we recorded growth in double digits. It continues. We have a permanent trade representative office in China. Our relationship continue in a field of investments. As we speak, a number of Chinese companies are active in carrying out the projects in various fields of Azerbaijan. These include renewable energy, industrial production, cooperation in the field of industrial clusters. I already mentioned the transportation route that links and provides for a safe and reliable and speedy transport of cargo and transit of cargo between our countries or through Azerbaijan in both directions. And this is all based on excellent political relationship which exists. As I already mentioned, Azerbaijan supports the principle of one China, and that's also a very strong foundation for our relationship.
Let's talk about future engines of growth. Big theme at Davos has been the benefits, along with the risks, of artificial intelligence. So let's talk about technology and what AI means to Azerbaijan, your digital transformation. How do you see it happening? How important is it for Azerbaijan's economy?
Well, it's absolutely important, I think, for any economy in the world, and Azerbaijan is not an exception. We have been recognizing the necessity to act and promote also institutionally World Economic Forum, I must say, has been a very good partner. Azerbaijan was the first country in CIS and in the region indeed, to set up a force affiliated center for fourth industrial revolution, which along with other public and governmental and private agencies is spearheading the increase of the speed of digitalization specifically in economy, but also in other areas of Azerbaijan. As we speak, we are developing local generative AI. Similarly, AI solutions are being applied by our leading blue chips companies, both state-owned and private-owned. But this is a space where the speed of change is a speed of light. So I think continuous investment and raising awareness, also in terms of the providing the right bridges between education and economy, human capital formation are necessary elements in order to not only to stay in the race, but to make sure that it impacts positively the economic development and prosperity of the nation.
Of course, Azerbaijan is going to be hosting COP29 later this year, the second country in a row to hold the meeting whose economy is underpinned by oil and significant gas reserves. What's your goal for COP?
Our goal, Azerbaijan has been entrusted the COP29. This is a process of which we are honored to chair and preside over this year. Our focus and theme of this year subject will be around climate financing. I think it's extremely important, and the reason being that mainly, and I think we have to give credit to very successful presidency of United Arab Emirates within COP28. The results achieved there, many questions which start with what to do have been, we believe, answered, but we have been lagging behind in terms of answering to the question how to deliver, how to do, and financing and mechanisms being in the center of them. Azerbaijan is uniquely positioned because of its history of both of being on the crossroads. You already mentioned it being probably one of the oldest nations where industrial production of energy, of oil, have started, and similarly we are ready to play our role, especially in bridging north and south, specifically also with the purpose of financial mechanisms and supporting and continuing the good initiatives and basis on which consensus is already there. We are seeking, working hand by hand with all stakeholders to contribute new initiatives. So COP29 will be an exciting journey, and we will do our best to take a step further from where we are in this process.
We've talked about the themes that have been covered here in Davos: climate change, financing, artificial intelligence, increasing geopolitical tensions. If there was one thing that everyone would change as a result of this meeting in Davos, what would you like it to be?
Well, if we have to go for one thing, I guess this wouldn't be okay. I will say it the way it will be. To me, this will be adherence to the stated principles to real actions, and that's all what it takes. All it takes is to act as we are saying that we are acting, and have an open dialogue within that framework of international law, rule and order that exists both for economic and non-economic issues in our planet.
It's hard to pick one, isn't it? Because you've got quite a big shopping list.
I did my best.
Thank you so
thank
much,
you.
Minister.
Thank you very much.
Let's continue our look inside Azerbaijan, and especially when it will next be right in the global spotlight, hosting the COP29 Climate Summit in November. Here with me in the studio is Kaveh Guilanpour, Vice President for International Strategies at the Centre for Climate and Energy Solutions. Let's start with talking about why COP29 is important for Azerbaijan and for the region.
Well, thank you for inviting me. COP29 is going to be the first COP that's been held in that part of the world, and I think it's important for a number of reasons. Obviously, for Azerbaijan, it's going to be a big deal. The spotlight of the world will be on it during the whole of 2024, but especially in November. But also, there's a number of countries in that region that have unique biodiversities, unique environments that are particularly vulnerable to climate change, which tend to get overlooked. So I think it's a chance for them to spotlight those considerations. But of course, it's also going to invite a lot of pressure on the region to show leadership and climate ambition as well.
Especially because history does seem to be repeating itself. It's another oil and gas-rich nation hosting the world's most important climate gathering. Is that a help or is it a hindrance?
Well, you're right, of course, but I think this will be close to my 20th COP that I'll attend. And probably at least half of those have been in countries that have fossil fuel resources of some kind. So I think it's interesting that it tends to be when it's in developing countries that it becomes particularly an issue. And that's something to reflect on. COP26 in the UK, for example. The UK is both an oil and gas producer and historically coal. So it's certainly not anything new. I think similarly to COP28, what I was advising in advance of that is let's judge by the outcome. And I think the UAE presidency was vindicated there, so let's hope that Azerbaijan also steps up. But also, being an oil and gas producer helped the UAE in terms of regional relationships and fostering trust with countries in a similar position. And I think it's arguable that the outcome of COP28 wouldn't have been achieved had the UAE not been an oil and gas producer itself. So let's wait and see what Azerbaijan delivers, I think.
Well, earlier this month, the incoming COP president, Mukhtar Babayev, said green growth was a priority for Azerbaijan in the decades ahead. I mean, do you think that really means anything? Because isn't that really just what every country needs to do?
Yes, I mean, you're right. It is what every country needs to do. The science is clear. In order to stay within the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit of the Paris Agreement, we need to achieve net zero emissions globally by 2050, and that means halving emissions by 2030 globally. So indeed, every country has to contribute to that. So the statement's very welcome, but we really will need to judge by actions rather than words. And as I say, I think Azerbaijan is going to be very much under pressure to show leadership in that regard.
Do you think Azerbaijan needs to up its commitments to the UN to cut emissions? I mean, the national defined contributions, maybe to do that ahead of COP, would that be a signal everyone will be welcoming?
Again, you're right. Every country is expected to put on the table a new climate target or nationally determined contribution in the first quarter of 2025, and that includes Azerbaijan. The Paris Agreement requires those climate targets to be successively more ambitious. So Azerbaijan's current target is a 40% reduction compared to 1990 levels by 2050. That is not a very ambitious target globally. As I said, the world needs to transition to net zero by 2050. So I think Azerbaijan will be under a lot of pressure. I think it would show real leadership for them to come forward with a new climate target early in advance of the COP, and my suspicion is that they will do that.
We've talked about why COP is important, why this COP is important for the region. I wonder how COP29 might change Azerbaijan's position on the global stage.
Well, I think there's a number of reasons countries would be interested in hosting a summit like this. One is a commitment for action on climate change and vulnerability domestically to the impact. As I say, I think that region in particular has a number of unique challenges that it's facing on climate change. But of course, it does raise the profile of the country in terms of a leader. Multilaterally, COPs are one of the biggest events that happen each year. World leaders are usually expected to attend. But with that positive aspect also invites a lot of international pressure and scrutiny. So I think Azerbaijan will need to step up and raise its ambition as well.
You talk about raising ambitions. You also mentioned that the region has some quite unique climate challenges. Talk me through those.
Well, for example, Georgia, which is a neighbouring country, has one of the highest biodiversity rates in continental Europe, which are under threat from climate change. Glaciers are retreating, sources of water for the renewable resource of hydro energy is being reduced in the region. So these are all having knock-on effects. There's impacts on agriculture. So these are all things that the countries are experiencing. And also their workforce will need to transition in a just transition towards renewable energy. And that's going to be particularly a challenge for Azerbaijan because it does have a significant reliance on fossil fuel production.
So those are the problems, those are the challenges. Let's look at what the potential outcomes could be, because already people are talking about COP29 as being the finance COP. So what breakthroughs are really needed, and will reality meet expectations?
Yeah, so COP29, the main mandated deliverable for COP29 is to agree a new climate target, which in the jargon is called a new collective quantified goal. As you will be aware, there's been this goal of 100 billion a year in climate finance that was agreed at the Copenhagen COP back in 2009. COP29 is expected to agree a new global target.
But nobody's even meeting that target.
Well, I think developed countries would argue that they have met that goal, although they met it late after the 2020 target year. There's an expectation that that target will need to increase beyond the 100 billion. The challenge we face is that COP28 made it clear that we need almost 6 trillion in climate finance by 2030 to implement existing climate targets. So obviously there's a huge disconnection between that 100 billion and the 6 trillion, and that's not going to be met by public sector finance in developed countries. So a big part of the conversation at COP29 will be how do we reform the international financial system so as to stimulate the global finance flows to go in the right direction.
It's the numbers you're throwing out there just get bigger and bigger and then seem less and less achievable.
Well, the 6 trillion figure includes the reality of global investment. So if you look at the amount of investment and finance flows globally a year, that's well within that range. The challenge and one of the goals of the Paris Agreement is to make sure that all finance flows and investments globally are aligned with the target of keeping temperatures within the 1.5 limit, but also achieving global climate resilience. So it's really sending a signal to private investors, multilateral development banks, international financial institutions to align all of their investment decisions over time to deliver on the goals of the Paris Agreement. But public sector finance from those countries that can afford it will be hugely important because that's a reliable source of finance for climate action, particularly for developing countries. And the South-South cooperation is something that's increasing globally and will be part of that conversation at COP29.
And that conversation will be wide-ranging because it's how to get to those figures, which I suppose are the sticking point. But at COP28, everyone seemed to agree to this world's first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement. What do you understand by that, and why is it significant?
Yeah. So the Paris Agreement at its heart has something called the ambition cycle. So every 5 years, countries come together and they're mandated to look at how they've progressed to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, but also to inform the next round of climate targets, which are due every 5 years. And as I say, the next one will be in the first quarter of 2025. So COP28 did that, and it agreed a number of global sectoral targets to be achieved. So things like tripling renewable energy by 2030 and doubling energy efficiency, transitioning away from fossil fuels in a just and equitable way. These are clear global signals that were agreed, but the challenge is that they're global and the climate targets are national and they're nationally determined. So what we will need to see is what the collective level of ambition of those climate targets are in 2025, whether they do take us closer to staying within the 1.5 limit, but also how countries have responded to this call to do things like tripling renewable energy and moving away from fossil fuels.
A lot of what we're talking about marks 2025 as being the big year, and I wonder if that plays into what we're hearing from some quite experienced negotiators who are suggesting that COP29 is going to be lower profile than COP28, with more focus on agreeing this new, longer-term, quantified goal on finance that we've been talking about. So what are you expecting?
Well, you're right. I mean, COP28 had a very large agenda, which was predicted by the Paris Agreement in terms of this 5-year cycle. So it was always touted as being this big, significant COP. But every COP is more important than the last because we need to maintain pressure and momentum towards the transition and delivering on the Paris Agreement goals. COP29, while it might be small in terms of its agenda and mandated deliverables, agreeing the finance target will be absolutely vital because this will determine how comfortable countries are, how much confidence, particularly developing countries, have in putting on the table ambitious targets, but also knowing and having confidence that they will then subsequently be able to implement them, because just raising targets on paper doesn't really achieve anything if they're not followed through. So while the agenda might be more streamlined than it was for Dubai, the importance of it can't be underestimated. It will really set the tone and for the ambition that can be achieved in the subsequent year.
So the agenda might be streamlined, but it is still very much global, although you have said that, of course, there are lots of national targets that have to be agreed. And, of course, this year is probably one of the biggest years for elections that we would have seen. I think half the world's population could potentially be going to the polls this year.
Yeah.
There could be changes of leadership. What impact could that have on the climate challenge and climate action that needs to follow?
Well, 2024 is a very important year because not only do countries have to spend this year actively developing their new climate targets and taking into account the outcome from COP28, they also have to enhance their cooperation to do that, which is another one of the mandates that came out of COP28. You're right, a number of countries have elections, including, we're sat in a studio here in London, including in the UK. But what polling has shown consistently, including in various by-elections that have happened over the last 12 months, is that the public's commitment and understanding of the climate challenge and commitment to net zero is holding strong. So as people around the world increasingly see the impacts of climate change, I think they understand that it needs to be tackled. The real challenge is how we do that and how we transition in a way that minimizes the impact on things like jobs, but actually highlights the opportunities. And the future shows that the world has a lot of opportunity in terms of the growth of green jobs and the potential in that. And I think governments need to highlight that to their electorates.
Kaveh Guilanpour, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.